Hey everybody, this is Modern Refugee. I was asked recently here to talk with a group of people who were working on a specific wilderness survival scenario, more specifically a wintertime wilderness survival scenario. And they wanted to get sort of my advice on things, and I agreed to talk to them, and it turned into a really good 2 hour conversation. And I took a lot of my gear along and I showed them different gear and how to use different things. And I took a lot of bushcraft stuff along, showed them some things that you can make with the stuff that's out in the woods. And we had a really good conversation. And there was something that I noticed about this conversation as it went along, as I showed them different things and as they asked me questions. A lot of my answers revolved around prevention. And prevention is something that you don't hear a lot about when you look at prepping and survival channels on YouTube. When people talk about survival situations on YouTube, it's skills and gear, and they're showing you different, ways that they do things and different things that they carry with them. And a lot of my answers, gear and stuff was second down the list, and the first on the list was always some type of preventative measure to keep you out of that situation in the first place. And the first thing that I mentioned was to these folks was you want to tell a competent person where you're going, what you're doing, when you plan on being back. That right there has saved more people than fancy wilderness gear. Because if something goes wrong and you don't check in, somebody can call for help. And most survival situations start as some type of recreation. Of course, there's other situations. There could be some kind of natural event. There could be a breakdown in an automobile in a wild area. But a lot of um, people who get into trouble out in the wilderness, that started out as some type of recreation. So if they had certain things in place before they even went out there, it would have prevented the bad situation from happening. And perfect example, you got some people that went out ice fishing. You going out ice fishing? We plan on being back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're going to park here. We're going to walk out a mile and a half. We're going to fish for a couple hours. We're going to come back in. 4:30, 5 o'clock rolls around. They didn't check in. They didn't call. Nobody came home yet. You want to pick up the phone, say, hey, you know what? Call 911. Say, hey, we got some fishermen that went off of this particular spot. They didn't check in. I'm afraid something's wrong. Can you guys go check it out? And then you got professionals, facilitating some type of rescue if it's necessary. And the same thing with hiking. We're going to park at a specific trailhead. We're going to walk this loop. We're going to start out, we're going to walk the loop counterclockwise, and we plan on being back about 6 o'clock. Something happens, 7:30, 8 o'clock rolls around. Something's not right here. The competent person who you left the information with can pick up the phone and call, and you can facilitate some help. And that's something that just isn't mentioned enough. I've watched dozens and dozens of outdoor survival videos and stuff. Nobody really talks about that, and I wanted to put that out there as good advice. As good advice, if you're going to go out and you're going to do any type of recreating out in the wilderness, you want to leave where you're going, what you're doing, when you're going to be back with a competent person that if something goes wrong, they can facilitate help for you. And another thing we discussed, I discussed a lot about clothing, and that might sound boring, but as the old saying goes, clothing is a shelter that you wear. Clothing is your first line of defense against the elements. So you want to dress appropriately when you go out. How many times have you went to a store in the wintertime up here, where you see somebody that's, dressed completely inappropriately, just even for going out to the store? Because if they'd have a breakdown or they would have something just going to the store, they're going to freeze because, they're dressed, in yoga pants and flip flops. You want to avoid that. You want to avoid that by dressing appropriately. And I got into the, dressing in the layers, having stuff like, wool sweaters, hoodies, things like socks, gloves. And I actually took some of the packs of little packs that I had in my different packs, and one of them had, of course, a pair of socks and a pair of gloves in it. Because if your feet start to get damp, you can switch those socks out. You can clip your damp socks on your pack so they can dry out a little bit. You can put the dry ones on. Your gloves get wet because you're doing something. You got a pair, a spare pair of gloves with you. You don't want to get sweated up. That was another thing that I brought up. You don't want to get sweated up. You start getting sweated up, you want to shed some layers. You want to, open your coat up. You want to let some of that heat out because you don't want to get sweated up. You don't want, even if you have the best synthetic material against your skin, if that gets wet with perspiration, it's going to get clammy. It's going to chill your core temperature down, and then you run the risk of hypothermia. You don't want to overexert yourself when you're out doing stuff. But you know what? Fear, anxiety, overexertion, panic, being panicky, all this is going to cause you to perspire, and that's what you don't want to do. And you want to kind of nip that in the bud before it even happens. And so clothing was something that I discussed pretty extensively. And another question that came up was, what if there was an injury? What kind of wild plants would be out there that you could use? And I actually gave them the example of willow, but then there was a downside to it too. And I said, again, it's best to have some medication in your first aid kit in your pack to deal with those things, because yes, there are certain things out in the wilderness that you can use medicinally. There's all kinds of stuff, but a lot of things have a lot of wild plants and stuff. Those wild plants will do multiple things, and willow was the example that I gave. Now willow is basically like a natural form of aspirin. You can chew on a piece of willow and it's basically like an analgesic, but it's also a blood thinner. So if you have some type of injury where there was a puncture wound, there was some type of cut or some type of crushing wound where there was bleeding involved, yeah, willow might help with the pain a little bit, but it also could promote bleeding, and you don't want to do that. So you don't want to guess when it comes to the plants and stuff that are out in the wilderness. If you don't know, it's easier to just take a old pill bottle, throw some Tylenol in it, put it in your pack. Now, if there is pain or something, you have the actual medication there that you can give for that situation. Again, it's a simple preventative measure. Another thing that was brought up was wild animals. Encountering with wild animals, particularly dangerous ones. The specific one that was brought up was a moose, and I've only encountered a moose in the wild once. I've only seen a moose and a moose calf here in Michigan one time. But I said my answer to that is if I was going to go out and do something, I'm not going to plan that in prime moose habitat like during the rut. I'm just going to avoid that entirely because of the problems that could come from that. And the other thing I said is just be people. When you're out in the woods and you're hiking and you're having a good time, you're talking, you're laughing, you're making noise. You don't want to startle an animal. And if you're just being people and you're talking and you're laughing and you're having a good time when you're out recreating, that noise that you're making is going to give any animals that are in the vicinity a warning, and they're going to probably take off unless something's really, really wrong. They're going to hear you and they're going to get out of there. And that's something that we do when we hike in bear territory up north. We just be people. We laugh, we talk, we make noise. And again, that goes back around to prevention. That doesn't cost anything. And then you don't have to worry about those animal encounters. At least that's been my experience. Another thing that came up, I said something about having spare charging cords and battery packs, and it was brought up that a lot of places don't have cell phone service, and that's true. There's a lot of places in the wilderness that don't have any cell phone service. But I gave an example that had happened to me and my wife personally. Years ago, we were up on a lake in the UP down in a deep valley, and we were fishing. The family was over at the cabin. We were a couple of miles away on the other side of the lake fishing in the morning when we had an electrical problem with the boat, and the boat died. Well, I thought, you know what? I got my paddle here. I'm going to paddle over to the other. We were close to the opposite shore. I'm going to paddle over to the other shore to one of the cabins that were over there. We'll walk up to the road, catch a ride, go back around the lake to the cabin, and get some help. That was the plan. And my plan sucked. And I started paddling. The wind kicked up in the opposite direction. I paddled, went forward a foot, went back 10 feet because of the wind. Well, my wife was with me, and the resourceful person that she was, she got out the cell phone. Now, these are older cell phones, not the smartphones we have today. She got out the cell phone, she watched the cell phone. And when she had a bar on that cell phone, because there wasn't a lot of service up there either, when she had a bar on that cell phone, she told me, I dropped the anchor down, and then she made a call, got through to our relation. They sent somebody over with a boat to give us a tow back to where they were at. And if you didn't have a phone with you, or if your phone wasn't charged, we couldn't have done that. We'd still be floating around out there on the lake. So just because um, you don't have a signal or a service in one specific spot doesn't mean that you're not going to hike down that trail a couple more miles. You might have a signal there. Cell phone service is weird. That's kind of just how it works. And there's been different times when we've been in backcountry places where we came out to the lake, and because we had a little bit of open sky there, you'd pick up a bar or two so you could make a call. So again, that was a preventative thing. If you have some type of communication device like that and it works, you can call for help and get you out of the situation where you can avoid some of those things. But I just thought it was a really good conversation that we had, and I found it interesting that a lot of my answers revolved around preventing being in those situations in the first place. Because of course, the best survival situation is one that you're not, you don't even have to be in. If you don't have to spend a couple of nights out in the woods because you did something ahead of time to prevent that situation entirely, that's the best, because you don't run the risk of a lot of other problems. So anyway, um, I also showed a lot of gear and stuff during that. And if you guys are interested in seeing some of the gear and stuff that I show, and it's nothing that I haven't already shown on my channel at some point, probably in the past. But if you guys would like to see some of the stuff that I showed these folks, just put it down in the description. I can maybe do another video on that as well. But I just wanted to cover this whole prevention aspect of wilderness survival that not a lot of people talk about. But anyways, Modern Refugee. Appreciate all my subscribers out there. Hope you guys got a little information and a little entertainment out of this video. And you guys take care.